Welcome to a special offering by Conversations with a Wounded Healer, the Burnt Out Practice Owner. This series will discuss the current state of group practice ownership, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll hear current and former practice owners' tales of glory and woe as we attempt to answer the ultimate question, why do we do this to ourselves? And we want to hear from you too. What have been your biggest moments of struggle or triumph? What are questions you want us to explore? I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I owned and operated my practice, Head Heart Therapy, for 10 years before selling in 2023. Ownership was an equally grueling and rewarding experience for me, and I now spend my time helping current practice owners find balance for themselves. Join us between releases of Conversations with a Wounded Healer for this special series. Hello! It's time for another installment of The Burnt Out Practice Owner. Welcome. So glad you're here. Little quick thing before we go into today's lovely interview. If you would like to support the podcast, one thing you can do is give us a rate and review. As you may or may not know, we are housed within my podcast Conversations with a Wounded Healer. So you can go to ratethispodcast.com/wounded healer to rate and review. Or of course, you can rate and review on Apple Podcasts like you would usually do. Yeah, so I'm glad you're here. And we have a guest today who I actually met on social media and will tell you that cute and fun story. And I just want to share, it's Vilmarie Narloch. And the reason Vilmarie is here is one of the things we need to, I think, envision for the future of what group practice is going to be is think about different iterations of what group practice can look like. And that's what Vilmarie has done, not by herself, which is the whole point of like how we can do something new. But she has created a collective called the Sana Healing Collective with a bunch of other co-conspirators, let's say, comrades. And it's a really cool thing. And I wonder if this might be the future of what is headed down the road in group practice. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Vilmarie Fraguada Narloch. She's a licensed psychologist and co-founder of Sana Healing Collective. She's an activist working to end the war on drugs and advocates for science and reality-based drug education and harm reduction approaches for all. She approaches her work from a harm reductionist and humanistic lens, focusing on the individual needs of the person, group, or community. She received a certificate in psychedelic therapies and research from the California Institute of Integral Studies in 2018. So please enjoy this really informative interview with Vilmarie Fraguada Narloch. Hey there, therapist. How you doing? If you're like a lot of people out there, maybe you need a little bit more support than usual. Well, I've got you covered. I'm currently running 2 groups that I plan to run again in the fall of 2024. So add your name to the wait list to be notified as soon as info is available. First is the Burnt Out Practice Owner Support Group for group therapy practice owners. We'll focus on the emotional component of business ownership while building trust and connection with other practice owners. We'll explore topics such as boundary setting, feeling underappreciated, overwork, and find ways to reconnect with our agency. And you'll also have the support of other practice owners when challenges arise within your business. Next is the Authentic Leaders Group. It's here to help you become the authentic and wholehearted leader you aspire to be. Join me on an 8-month journey of self-discovery and leadership mastery, where you'll enhance your leadership skills and forge meaningful connections with fellow therapists who are committed to their own growth and the betterment of the therapy field. For the Burnt Out Practice Owner waitlist, go to www.headheartbiztherapy.com/burnt-out. Make sure you've got the T and BURNTOUT. And next is the Authentic Leaders Group waitlist at www.headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group. Hope to see you soon. Hello, Vilmarie. Welcome to the Burnt Out Practice Owner.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
OMG, yes. And I think we should talk about how we met because it's a cute story.
It's a very like internet meet cute like.
I know. Do you remember the Instagram handle? I'm gonna try to look it up.
I think it's called Gaia Gives. Something like this, Gaia something?
Gaia Music Collective.
Gaia Music, that's what it is.
Yes. So whoever is doing that out in New York, they're creating pop-up choirs and creating amazing, beautiful music a cappella. It's gorgeous. And I commented on one of their posts and I was like, oh my God, you've got to bring this to Chicago. And then you posted, and I don't even remember, like, maybe I like looked at your profile and I was like, Chicago, therapist.
Right. It was just like, yes, I'm also in Chicago. Like, this would be great. And then all of a sudden I have an email from Sarah being like, I found you on the internet.
Yeah.
I was so excited. Like, so great.
Yeah. It's funny because like that's not what social media was really designed for, but I actually use it for real connection. So
yeah, why not?
I beat you, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah. Zuck you. Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, why don't you more formally introduce yourself and what you're doing in the world these days?
Sure. So my name is Vilmarie Fraguada Narloch. She, her, ella. I'm a clinical psychologist. I am a drug policy reform activist, an advocate, and harm reductionist. And I'm the co-founder and director of Sana Healing Collective here in Chicago.
Yay! And the whole reason that I reached out to you is wanting to hear about the collective model and how that's working. Mm-hmm. And as we were talking in that, what was that, February when we met? I don't know.
Something like that.
Yeah, things are not really, time is not clicking for me. Right. I was just really impressed and really excited to hear that someone's doing a collective model in such a collaborative and like liberation focused way. So, well, first of all, you want to talk more about what Sana does because you're doing some cool shit.
Sure. Yeah. So Sana Healing Collective is a nonprofit, actually, and we do primarily ketamine-assisted therapy. So we are founded on the idea of becoming a psychedelic-assisted therapy clinic, sort of bound and grounded in harm reduction principles and philosophy. And all of our therapists are trained in psychedelic-assisted therapy. Right now, it's sort of a tie between those of us who are co-founders that trained at the California Institute of Integral Studies and our other folks who also trained with IPI, the Integrative Psychiatry Institute. So we have a nice mix of trained folks. And our mission, our goal is to make psychedelic-assisted therapy accessible. I don't know if you've seen about places like Oregon where they are legalizing things like psilocybin. P.S. We're trying to do that in Illinois as well. But it's expensive. It's just like very expensive
really
treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has to do with, well, regulation, first of all. Yep. But then it requires a lot of time of the therapist. And our time is very valuable. And so it can be very expensive. And even with ketamine, which is a much shorter acting substance, it's still a lot of time and effort, and it can be pretty costly. So all of our fundraising goes to support our community care fund, which essentially it helps offset the costs of the treatment for folks who have limited resources, focusing on folks who are particularly, of communities that are oppressed and who have experienced, that kind of oppression, people of color, people directly impacted by the war on drugs, and also people that dedicate their lives to the community. So community organizers, folks like that.
Awesome. So tell us about the collective structure.
Yeah. So admittedly, I'll just say up front here that it's a work in progress, and we're learning things every day. And one of the big, I think, pieces for all of us who were starting this organization together was that we wanted to do things differently. We had all worked in traditional sort of mental health practices, both, community mental health and private practice and in academia and such. And so, we all had been through all of the things and had seen all of the injustice and just backwards way that our mental health system works. And so we were kind of dedicated to doing things a little bit differently. And part of that was by organizing our organization on a non-hierarchical model. So using a consensus process is how we did, brought our board together. And we've kind of also carried that into our clinical practice and decision-making, as far as big decisions in our day-to-day as well. And again, like, it's not perfect. It can be a slow process at times, but ultimately being able to have everybody's voice heard when it comes to big decisions and allowing each of our sort of individual gifts and things that we want to bring to the collective is, I think, what helps us all feel valued and like we have a place and we're home at Sana.
Mm-hmm. And so is it just the board members that are in the decision-making process, or literally everybody in the collective?
It's kind of literally everybody in the collective. There's, things that are more like nonprofit-y, as I say, that, the board, governance, things like this that the board will address, and like often like fundraising things.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as day-to-day like operations and clinical practice, all of the folks that are doing that actual work get to weigh in on big decisions.
Are there any decisions that you've gone through recently that you can sort of like walk us through the steps and how it goes?
Oh, sure. I think a really good example actually is with our training program. So we do clinical training, and we're an ACEP site for those in Chicago who know what that means.
Well, for people who aren't, that don't, tell them.
So it's sort of like a collective of the different psychology and counseling programs in the area. Also sort of like partnering with local service providers to create a sort of like a more of an organized program for students to apply for and find practicum placement for their clinical training.
Oh, great.
And so any service provider can like elect to be part of ACEP. You kind of have to like fill out a form and they tell you, whatever. And you can choose like which schools you want to accept students from.
See, this is news to me. Everybody needs to know this. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. So we're that. So we take primarily psychology doctorate level students for our training program. We have 2 spots. And so my colleague, Jeff Beachy, and I are the supervisors for the clinical training because we're both psychologists. And he is, although we kind of like don't have like real titles officially, but on paper, he's our like training director. But basically we have this whole process where he receives the applications. We put that into a bit of a like spreadsheet, save all the applications in the drive, and everyone has a chance to go through all of those applications, review all of our notes about each candidate, and then they get to weigh on who they think meets sort of their and our standard to be offered an interview. They're invited to the interviews, and we also record them if they can't make it. They're able to watch those interviews and like fully weigh in on, who they think would be a good fit for Sana Healing Collective. And it's great because everybody kind of like picks up on different things, so there's things that I might have noticed in an interview that someone else didn't pick up on and vice versa. Or there may be questions that we didn't ask that other people pick up on. And that's how we went through the process. We actually just did the match day. Offer day was yesterday. So we were able to find 2 really great candidates who are going to be joining us next year for their training program. But it was a really like even like down to the wire, like, that on Monday kind of like going back and forth and like, okay, like, what do we think about these 2? Like, they're really close, so, and that was really helpful that we could work with everyone on the team, even our current interns, to help us come up with that decision because it's a big one for us.
Yeah. Well, and I think you'd mentioned when we were talking before about a particular protocol that you use when it comes to decision making, because I'm sure some people are listening are like, that sounds like a fucking nightmare. How the fuck do you do that?
So we follow what's called a consensus model. And there's different types of consensus models, and we sort of have found a version of it that works for us. And it's essentially like, and we probably don't follow it to a T, and maybe we make mistakes, but ultimately it's anytime there's a big decision, giving people a chance to like review whatever is needed, discuss whatever is needed, and ultimately kind of come to a vote or a decision about a thing.
And does it have to be a unanimous decision?
It doesn't have to be a unanimous. Obviously that would be ideal, and we try to get to there as much as possible, but it's not always possible. And, so there is like versions of consensus where like, if you can't come to an agreement and you kind of can opt out of the decision with making it known that like, that's not something necessarily that you decide, but
like
if
the
the rest
Supreme
of the
Court
team,
dissent.
Yeah, kind of, and so it can be a slower process at times because of that, because we're looking for everyone to weigh in. And, like I said, we also all kind of bring our own gifts. So there are particular things on a day-to-day basis that like Jeff does, or I do, or Valerie, any of the other folks do that like don't require everyone to weigh in. Like,
right.
For example,
should I order more toilet paper? The answer is yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm just going to do that because we need it. Oftentimes I'll need someone to tell me, that we're running low on toilet paper,
right.
But then I can do that. Right. But that's also part of the fact that we all work together is like someone can see there are other people looking out, for things like, are we running low on toilet paper? And then can like, get that message to me to like, click, order, whatever, check when our subscription is coming, whatever the case may be. And yeah, so a good example of like when we don't all have to weigh in necessarily is we just launched that we're doing a summer ketamine assisted therapy group, for example.
I saw the email.
Oh, cool. And so that's going to be facilitated by Valerie, Eric, and Rick. Now, for them to determine like what days they're going to do things, like they don't need all of us to weigh in because it doesn't matter to me when they do a thing, unless we have like something conflicting. But, ultimately those three are the ones that are determining that info and how they want the group to run and all of that. So there are different things that we do. Like, and I, for example, do a lot of the nonprofity things. So like, I don't necessarily need to ask everyone if it's okay for me to like submit our registrations to solicit when those things are due, or to like save receipts, like, things like this that we each kind of have in our role that we make decisions on that fit our role that don't necessarily require everyone to weigh in all the time.
So, because this can get messy,
Absolutely.
right? So I'm specifically asking some of these questions not to try to test you, but because I know other people are going to have these questions, right? So how did you come to those decisions about what decisions don't need to be made? You know what I mean? Because
that's a really good question.
One person thinks is important, somebody else might be like, oh, this is just part of my job description. So have there been any kerfuffles or anything come up around stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that has developed over time of just getting into our workflow and our operations. But certainly, like toward the beginning, there were some things that just those growing pains of like trying to figure out like, okay, who actually like wears this hat and like makes sense to do the thing. I think a good example is actually our training program. We've now had 2 years of it under our belt and it's been really wonderful for us. But when we were considering whether we wanted to do it, there were some struggles. Like we had kind of differing ideas about what it should look like, who would be eligible. That took us a long time to discuss and like come to agreements on. And there were some things that we didn't agree on, to be frank. And we kind of like, we did it anyway. And it's been a really wonderful thing for the organization. It was one of those, like, we kind of had to take that leap, take that risk and, knock on things. It's been going well so far. But that was, a place where we definitely had to have longer conversations and really think about how that fit into our values or not and that kind of thing.
Well, my next question is sort of about money. Because I think, when I was running Head Heart, the things that I would think about was sort of like, because it was definitely a hierarchy. And I thought about it as levels of responsibility because like hierarchy is almost a dirty word right now. And I don't think that that's true. I don't think hierarchy is inherently bad. I think just a lot of people abuse the power that they have. And so hierarchy sounds like a dirty word, right?
Totally.
So I would explain it to the staff as sort of these levels of responsibility, right? Like you are responsible for your clients and doing your notes and like just keeping your office clean. And that's it. That's all you're responsible for. And then the managers are responsible for making sure that you're seeing your clients, you're doing your notes, right? And then I was responsible for making sure that you get paid on time and that all, everything would run smoothly and all that sort of stuff. And so that's sort of how I know a lot of practice owners can justify the profit from the practice based on I am taking on more responsibility and more risk. So I'm curious in this collective model, like what does that level of responsibility and risk and then potential financial reward look like in this collective model?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is where like the nonprofit-y bits come in too, because there's particular types of, responsibility and like fiduciary responsibility that some of us who are on the board hold, particularly myself as like the director and Jeff as, on the board side treasurer, again, on paper. And that really is just because like he's better at numbers than any of us.
Yeah.
And I assign the things, right?
Right.
So it kind of comes down to some sort of arbitrary roles that we have to take for the sake of compliance with nonprofit things. And then, as we were developing our clinic, our practice, coming up with our rates, all of that was a everyone conversation also.
Yep.
So the board, with Jeff's good math brain, at what is typical, common in this space as far as compensation.
Mm-hmm.
What do we know these insurers pay out? What is a reasonable amount to pay each clinician at the different levels of licensure that they have, and the different levels of responsibility that they take on the practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really kind of what it came down to. So our medical providers, our nurses, take home a little bit more than our therapists because there's more risk to their license because of the medical stuff.
Right.
Those of us who are supervisors also take on more risk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's that kind of level of looking at those different components of it.
Okay. So people are paid differently based on their roles. And I think this is a misnomer of the whole not-for-profit thing. Not-for-profit doesn't mean that there isn't a profit actually that's made. So I'm curious, is there some sort of profit share? Or are you right now just putting everything back into the business? Because you're still, how long have you been in operation?
2.5 years now.
So still babies, right? It's a little baby toddler organization, right?
Baby.
Yeah. So what does the profit share look like?
So the profit share really looks like whatever profit there is goes back to the community care fund for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we're looking at bringing on a new therapist, or, bringing on a new program, or taking on something, are we looking for a new space, or, different things like this that are going to be, cost money.
Mm-hmm.
We then kind of look at the funds again and balance things out based on what we need, and also what our clients need. So for the most part, ultimately the idea is, once we get to this sort of balanced point, is that some percentage of whatever we take in from insurance companies, for example, or from people paying out of pocket, or from the people who do pay out of pocket, a percentage of that, goes to us individually to pay for our own rent and stuff. A percentage goes obviously to overhead. And then the remainder goes back into that community care fund pot. And we built it that way because we knew capacity-wise, we don't have the capacity and the resources right now to hire fancy schmancy development fundraising person. Mm-hmm. Someday we will get there and that will be wonderful. Mm-hmm. But until then, we don't want to rely on heavy fundraising costs to fill up that bucket all the time. Yeah. So kind of having that in mind helps us stay sustainable while we work toward building our capacity for fundraising. And we have a wonderful consultant, shout out to Mac, who's helping us develop the board and helping us all learn a little bit more about fundraising, because we're all clinicians, everyone on our board and ourselves. And that's just not necessarily a strong suit for us, but we want to learn and we want to be able to do that a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, therapists are terrible salespeople, so that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I think the not-for-profit thing makes it a little bit different for y'all, because I know I think that sort of the future of group practice is going to move back towards this more collective model, which is interesting because that may leave out some of the non-fully licensed, the provisionally licensed clinicians, which is going to be interesting. But do you have any advice for somebody who might want to build a collective? What's important? Is there something you didn't do that you wish you had? Anything you got?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would say spend a lot of time before even building the things, just communing with the people that you're hoping to start this business with, right? Just being in community with folks. Everyone that was involved in Sana were people that the founding members are people that I connected with as colleagues, as friends through the harm reduction space. And we had a lot of conversation about our values and about how we want to show up for people in our community, how we want to show up as clinicians. And I think that really helped us determine how Sana, was going to look. Each little baby step along the way. And we're certainly not at the big vision of where we want to be, but I do think we're at a really good spot for where we are. And I think a lot of that has to do with like, the core people and our shared values. So I think really spending a lot more time than you think on just building those relationships and understanding each other and getting to know each other, getting to know how everyone ticks before starting the business.
Well, and I, being in a couple different failed business partnerships, my lawyer always said at the beginning of any business partnership, one, know that you are entering into a marriage, because that's basically what like the intimacy. Because as soon as you put money into the equation, like if you're sharing a bank account, you're married, basically. So you need that level of like trust with somebody. And then the second thing is having your exit plan planned out before problems happen, so you know how to resolve them. Is that something that you've done as well? You all have exit plans in place?
I think that's probably one thing we could work a little bit better on.
Well, call a lawyer because they will tell you that.
Yes, we have great, luckily, newly appointed good lawyer support, legal support.
Oh, good.
But yeah, I think that's a solid piece of advice for sure.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the nonprofit-y, like advocate activist version of me probably has the struggles. And that's, a lot of us at Sana have similar tendencies, and to where like we're really passionate about the work that we do and we're going to do it no matter what. And it's the no matter what that I think can get you in the trouble. I've certainly stayed at jobs longer than I needed to, or like, bent some boundaries in ways that, young me didn't recognize at the time, just because I was so passionate about the work.
Right.
And, those of us with big hearts are easy targets for that kind of stuff. But.
Right. Well, and when it becomes a business, like I was just talking to a client today about sort of the challenge of having a really open heart and having really expanded ideas of how we should live in the world that aren't supported by the very capitalist, profit-driven society that we have. So because you have to do both, sometimes like what you want to do with your heart is just not smart from a business perspective. Totally. And I think a lot of practice owners sometimes, unfortunately, like will back themselves into a corner because they were making choices from their heart. I mean, I can tell you that I made all of my financial decisions from my heart instead of from numbers. Up until I realized like, oh, this could be a problem. I could not have money in my bank account if I keep doing this. Yeah. So I get that.
Yeah. And I think that's, where when we do have some of those disagreements or places where we're not feeling fully aligned in the consensus model, I think oftentimes that's one of the things is, I mean, we're all, working in psychedelics too. So talk about expanded ways of thinking. So, we have a very strong vision of how we want to show up in the world and how we want to work in the world. And that sometimes like really collides with like capitalism and the mental health system and, insurers and, all of that stuff. And so there is that kind of balance that you have to play with like what's practical versus like how we actually want to be able to show up. So there's a lot of barriers and limitations that can feel almost painful to some of us to have to like write notes in the way that we have to write notes, or have to like have certain things in place to be able to bill insurance. And that, I don't love it either. And I would love more than anything to be able to divest from insurance payers. And I also recognize that like in order for this to be accessible for a lot of people, like we need to be able to, and for us, frankly, we need to be able to take insurance. And so until someone gives us like a couple $1 million, we'll have to, and we welcome that. And until that happens, we have to kind of like work a little bit within the system in the best ways that we can, while still sort of like holding on to our core values and like what we want to, holding on to our vision of what we know it can be in the future.
Right. Have you heard of reinventing organizations? I'm looking this up while we're talking about this.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah. What's his name? Let me pull up his name real quick. I think is it Frederic Laloux? He's French for sure. Show me Mr. Laloux. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Frederic Laloux. So his book, Reinventing Organizations, talks a lot about envisioning the future of the way that we can work and some people might read his book and be like, this is absolutely impossible. But I think what you're doing is it's like you're stretching the boundaries of what is possible in the current structure of our workforce. And I think the more organizations try to do that, the better we are in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, I think that sounds accurate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, how can people find you?
Well, we are on the internets. So we're on our sonahealingcollective.org is our website. We're most active on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Sana Collective. Yeah. So that's how you can find us. We have some cool stuff coming up in the near future to look out for. So yeah.
Cool. Is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you really want people to know before we completely wrap up?
Oh man, so much. I will plug a couple of policy things.
Sure.
If that's allowed. So I'm a harm reductionist to my core. So there are a couple of pieces of legislation out now. There's the overdose prevention site pilot program bill. The chief sponsor of that is Rep. Ford. That's House Bill 2. And there's also a sister Senate bill for overdose prevention sites for a pilot program here in Chicago. If you're not familiar what overdose prevention sites are, you can go to the Illinois Harm Reduction and Recovery Coalition's website or also their social medias to learn more. They have lots of really great information on that.
Yeah.
It saves lives, like full stop.
Yep.
And the other piece is House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 3695, which is the Illinois Cure Act, the Compassionate Use and Regulation of and Research of Entheogens. And that is an act that will essentially legalize psilocybin-assisted therapy and also remove it from the schedule, the controlled substances schedule in Illinois. So I've been advocating for both of those bills. I helped write the initial overdose prevention site bill like ages ago before it became this version of it, and also helped write the Illinois Cure Act. And so that's one of the other sides of me is my policy reform hat. I'm very passionate about. So
you're a badass.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing your badass self to this world.
Thank you. Likewise.
Oh, thank you. Well, this has been great. I appreciate you, and I'm certain our listeners will really appreciate your perspective on how to run a business.
Thanks. Appreciate you too.
Thanks for listening to this special Burnt Out Practice Owner series. If you want more information about today's guest, go to our website at www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast. Thanks to the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, and I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. Until next time, bye-bye.